Okay, we're going to show you some tips and tricks to figure out whether someone actually said something. In other words, to source quotes. What do we mean by that? Well, if you've been on the web for more than 5 minutes, you've probably seen stuff like this. Some sort of inspirational quote attributed to a person. I am indebted to my father for living, but to my teacher for living well. Alexander the Great. Or this by Thomas Edison. Our greatest weakness lies in giving up. It's probably not such a big deal that these float around Facebook and so forth without people knowing whether the person actually said this or not. Additionally, I would say that it's quite hard to check. And that's one thing you'll find out when you actually start to do this yourself, is that sourcing quotes is one of the hardest web tasks out there, right? So why are we tackling this? If it's so hard, if it's sort of pervasive on the web, why are we tackling this particular issue? First, I think it's useful to at least be able to try to source a quote on the web. Fake quotes are everywhere, and very often you'll be using a quote in a paper, a presentation, or even something like a college admissions letter. And if someone catches you using a fake quote, something that someone knows, oh, that person never said that, it's going to damage your credibility, right? It's going to damage your credibility in the paper, in the application letter, in your presentation. So you should at least try to source the quotes that you use. So it can be useful. The second reason why sourcing the quote might matter, or having a skill of sourcing quotes might matter, is that the skills for checking quotes are very, very similar and very, very transferable to checking other things on the web. As I've mentioned, sourcing quotes is one of the more difficult tasks on the web. If you can learn to source quotes, you can probably do a lot of simpler stuff, like figuring out whether a given event happened or if a video is fake. I actually consider those questions to often be much easier than sourcing a quote. If you can source quotes, you can do the other stuff as well. So 4 lessons. Hey, I actually expanded this to 5 lessons. So there's my first fact check for y'all. 5 lessons. We're going to go through 5 lessons today, not 4, 5. First, beware of the snippet. I'll talk about what that means. 2, use the dots. I think this will be the most exciting thing that you learn this session. 3, recognize quality sources, some basic guidance on what a quality source is in regards to quotes and more generally. 4, just all things being equal, why you should steer towards something that's a debunk, right? Something that says this person did not say this versus something that says that this person did. And finally, check the context. Find out if you're going to use that quote, especially in something serious, make sure you understand the context in which that quote was said. So let's start with this. Beware the snippet. This is a pretty easy one. So we have this quote floating out here from Abraham Lincoln. A lot of quotes are attributed to Abraham Lincoln. This says, "There's no honorable way to kill, no gentle way to destroy. There is nothing good in war except its ending." Okay. Abe was a very serious guy. Maybe he said that. If we do a search here, I've just executed this search, no gentle way to destroy, Lincoln. And initially, we see something that looks like a confirmation here, right? There's no honorable way to kill, no gentle way to destroy. And what does it say? Right in front of here, right in front of this, it says Abraham Lincoln said it, right? That seems pretty determinative. Now, this thing up here is called a snippet. And snippets can be really useful, but they can also be very deceptive if you're not careful. So this does say Abraham Lincoln said this, right? But look at the context here, right? What's this, right? It says IMDb. It seems to be an actor as Abraham Lincoln. If we actually click through to that snippet, we find it's not Abraham Lincoln saying this. It's the character of Abraham Lincoln saying this on Star Trek. So you got to be careful with the snippets. You got to make sure that you click through find out what the actual context of the snippet is, or note at least what the source is here. I think if you knew what IMDb was, maybe you would slow down and say, I don't think that's actually historical Lincoln saying that. I think that might be Star Trek Lincoln. This brings us to our second point, and I can show it here. Use the dots, right? Let's do this thing. So we have this thing here, right? Did Lincoln say, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree"? I used a bunch of Lincoln quotes here. I use maybe some others as well, or maybe I just used Lincoln quotes. I can't remember what I put in this. But give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. That sounds really old timey. Maybe Lincoln said that. And up here again, we see on the snippet. And we see in some of these results down here, we see a lot of stuff seeming to confirm that Lincoln said this. We want to know, though, what these sources are. And the way we used to do this is we used to have people click through and then do a search on Wikipedia and find out, do people know this source, right? But there's a new way to do this. It's much faster, right? So let me show you this. See those dots right there? They're 3 dots. That's why I call this technique the 3 dots technique. All right, so the 3 dots, if you click them, they give you this, right? Now, this actually doesn't tell you much here, right? This particular one doesn't tell you much. It just says it was indexed. What that means is Google doesn't actually, there's no Wikipedia page about this. There's nothing that really tells us what this is. That doesn't mean it's wrong. I want to be really clear about that. But it means we have no idea what sort of site this is. We can use the 3 dots anywhere on this page. So this person here analyzes the quote. We don't know who Julian Fassard is. It seems to be some sort of performance coach or something like that. And then you have these other ones, like all these little tiny quote sites that have a lot of unverified quotes, like Brainy Quote. And again, nothing on Brainy Quote, right? If you get down here, you'll find this one here. And this says, Quote Investigator is a website that fact-checks reported origins of widely circulated quotes, etc. Quote Investigator is actually one of the best sources out there, but this technique allows you to go through a bunch of results like that and then find out the one that is probably going to be most useful. You could do this one here, the Quote Investigator. You could also look at Philly Mag, which is a magazine, but it probably has a fact-checking process behind it that will help you out, right? And so this is much easier than going through and investigating each thing in your search results. Just clicking again, going through and trying to see if there's something here that might be a decent source. In this case, we can click through to Quote Investigator, and we find that there's no substantive evidence that Abraham Lincoln ever said this remark, right? All right, so those are the 3 dots, and we'll use the 3 dots through a couple other ones here as well. Recognize quality sources. So once you know the 3 dots, then the question becomes, well, what's a useful source? So there's a couple things to look for. First is, are they in a position to know? Do they have relevant expertise? Are they a witness to the actual quote itself? Do they have a professional capacity, such as a reporter, that might help with that? I did some last minute edits on these slides, as you're noticing. 2, do they have a review process, either documented? Quote Investigator walks you through the process they use to check the quote, links everything up, very reliable in that way. A source like that phillymag.com source has some sort of error checking process, right? Some sort of review process. And there are some quote sites like WikiQuote that use a crowdsourced review process and are usually quite good, versus these things like Brainy Quote, A to Z quotes, and so forth that have no quality control. And so you see, like, again, the things that have some sort of quality control on them, either through the process that they use, really through the process that they use. That's where you want to steer to. The things that don't have a quality control process, that's what you want to avoid. And again, we see that when we go through this. The quote investigator has a process, is known to be an authority on this, whereas Goodreads is a user-contributed site, right? If you go to Goodreads, the quotes on there are all things that people added. There's no real review or quality control process. Same thing with Reddit. Sometimes actually the replies on Reddit can be really useful. But again, these different sources, while there seems to be quite a lot of them, none of them, all of them together don't add up to the authority of quote investigator. All right. Let's go to our fourth point here. So steer towards the debunk. What do I mean by that? Well, so there's this Mark Twain quote here. I'll give you a break from the Lincoln. It's not the size of the dog in the fight; it's the size of the fight in the dog. Let's see what we get here, right? So we actually don't know anything about this site when we click the about this result. It's just Google knows they indexed it. We don't know if Mark Twain Studies is associated with something authoritative. But one of the things that we do know is, as we go through the other stuff isn't good either. And so what should we choose on this page if we have to choose something? Well, what I would argue is, if you have a page of things and nothing standing out in your scan as being particularly authoritative, with quotes, steer towards the site which is debunking the quote. And so we can see here, apocryphal means probably never happened. And so in this case here, we probably want to steer towards this because in general, the motivation, there's not a lot of motivations for someone to say a quote never happened, other than that person trying to make a valiant effort to check that quote. Whereas there's lots of motivations for people to use and spread fake quotes because it makes Mark Twain seem like Mark Twain is agreeing with them, that sort of thing. And once we see the Center for Mark Twain Studies, there's no Wikipedia page on this, but maybe there's something else that might help here. And you see, once we steer into this, that actually it does a bunch of research. In this case, for Mark Twain quotes, since you see all this research out there and how they've sourced it, they've actually found that it was initially attributed to President Eisenhower in the 50s and later got attributed to Mark Twain. This is a good source. And by steering towards the debunk rather than steering towards things that reaffirmed the idea that the quote was true, we were able to find this particular page. Fifth point here. Check the context. So one final note. I see, for example, this, let's show this again. Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves. And I see people use this quote for a lot of things. And some of them are actually quite trivial. Like you'll see people say, those who deny freedom to others do not, deserve it not for themselves. And it'll be about whether students get to wear T-shirts that have profanity on them or something like that, right? And so someone puts in a speech to the school board that, like, we should be able to wear these, and I have no opinion on what you should be able to wear in school. But someone in a speech to the school board might say, we should be able to wear these T-shirts even though they may be considered vulgar, because as Abraham Lincoln said, those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves. All right, so context is important. It's important because sometimes people are saying the opposite of what you said, but in this case, it's not only that. First of all, we do this search, those who deny freedom to others, Lincoln. We find that this quote is probably true. This is the Smithsonian, a very well-respected organization that is using that quote. We have some sort of attribution here that it's in a letter to H.L. Pierce. And if we look through, we can get a primary source here, use our Control F, our Command F on a Mac, and search for the quote. And it says, he who would be no slave must consent to have no slave. Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves. All right, so maybe this is evident now that we are looking at this, but this quote about those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves, it's not about something like telling people that they can't put up a fence somewhere, right? It's about slavery. And if you don't know that context before you use it, and you use it to support something that's relatively trivial, people that know where that quote comes from might form a negative opinion of you, because in using the quote, you may be comparing your cause to this infinitely greater cause. So understanding the context of quotes, especially if you're using them for something serious, is quite important. Now, I know when I flip this slide, it's going to say 4 instead of 5. I did change these. 5 lessons. All right. So there's 5 lessons, right? How many lessons? There's 5 lessons. We went through here. 1, beware of the snippet. The snippet, when read on its own, if you're reading it too fast, if you don't click through to the link, can often give people a misconception about the truth, the veracity, the context of the quote, right? When you see the snippet, your job is not done. You have to look carefully at where the snippet is from, and you usually have to click in to see what that little snippet says when you look at it in context. Use the dots. I hope and think that this will be one of the most useful things you've learned. The Google Dots there allow you to go through a set of search results, to do so quite fast and find the search result which is going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. Quality sources, you want to choose things that have expertise or some sort of process of quality control. And that might be a process like Quote Investigator, where they show their work really intensively and show you where they pulled all the information they're using from. It might be something like WikiQuote, right? Not these other quote sites, but WikiQuote, where users all work to make sure that everybody is being as accurate as possible. It could be a magazine's fact-checking process. The fact it's included in a major publication, and somebody in the process of that publication had to look at it to make sure it was accurate. These are the sorts of hallmarks of quality sources. I'll just mention one thing here. Just because it's in a book, oh, this is so true with quotes. Just because it's in a book does not mean it's true. So please do not say, well, there's a book that has that quote in it, therefore it's true. That's not enough. You're actually looking for sources that have specific expertise in the area of the quote. All things equal, steer towards the debunk. We tell people don't be biased in your searches, but the nature of the web in quotes is you'll find 1,000 sites out there promoting a false quote. If you find one site explaining why that quote is false, it's almost always going to be false, right? The site that claims it's false is almost always, if you can find it, is almost always a better first stop than something that is just sort of regurgitating it again. And then finally, check the context. Make sure that you understand the quote. Not only did the quote happen, but you understand the context in which it was said. Sometimes the context changes the meaning of the quote in ways you should be aware of if you're using the quote. Final note, I'm just going to repeat this. Checking quotes is really hard. Some quotes are easy to check. A lot of them are very, very hard. In my dream world, I would not make this a 20-minute presentation. I would make this a 3-week, a 4-week module and show you how to use a variety of sources to source quotes. because there's 3 weeks or 4 weeks of material that we could present. So if you get into this and it feels overwhelming, there's the same lesson we have in fact checking and claim checking, right? And source verification. If you start to try to verify a quote and you're just finding pages and pages of garbage on Google, but no good sources that really ground it in a time, in a place, just maybe pass on the quote. Choose another quote, right? This is the same thing we tell people when they're fact checking. If it starts to feel overwhelming, it doesn't mean it's all for nothing that you checked it out. It means that it's hard it's hard to discover, and that might mean that you want to pass on the quote and find a quote that you can more easily source. So happy checking, and I hope these are useful to you. And that's it.